Let's move on to this now. ANC veterans Mac Mahaj and Pallo Jordan have written a book about the events leading up to negotiations before the release of Nelson Mandela in 1990. The book, titled Breakthrough, reveals the skirmishes that ultimately carved a pathway to the negotiating table. Mac Mahaj joins us live in studio and Pallo Jordan joins us via Zoom. So let me start with you, Mr. Maharaj. Thank you to the both of you, by the way, for coming out and having a bit of fun with me on a Sunday afternoon. Mr. Maharaj, let me start with you. Why this book?
I think that there is a tendency in the world where conflict resolution has become a fashion. And when they focus on conflict resolution, they talk about what happens at the negotiating table. But how parties who are engaged in a war reach that table becomes a crucial question, and it is not sufficiently examined. In our own country, there have been different versions. They are basically memoirs. They don't give you reference. They don't enable you to cross-check the facts. So what Pallo and I have done is to dig into the records from all sides, from the side of the National Party government, from the ANC side, from the mass democratic movement, and put that story together so that people can see how we reached that table.
And to you, Mr. Jordan, let me ask the question then, why now? Why is Breakthrough the book that is for this moment? Mr. Pallo Jordan, I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, I've got you now. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
It takes time to research these things. I'm saying it takes time to research these things and to put the information together. No one had done it up to now. Mac and I took the opportunity, since we were working on another project, and then we had the COVID epidemic, and we said, okay, let's work on this. And that's what we decided to do. The significance of the book is that it tries to bring together from a host of archival sources a narrative which explains how we got to that meeting in 1990 at Thulasizwe and beyond. That is the explanation. Now, is it the book for the moment? I think it adds to South Africa's understanding of the processes that brought us to democracy. Lots has been written about it by a whole number of people. There is the thesis of miracle, etc., etc. And I think what we try to demonstrate here is that there might have been a miracle or there might not, but we have a substantive story to tell and we back it up with sources. So there was no miracle. It engaged struggles, some of them overt, some of them covert, some of them open, some of them secret meetings, etc., etc. But that was what happened.
So, Mr. Maharaj, the question that I have for you has to do with the various sources from which you draw to conclude this book and to write it. And it's sources both of the liberation movements, but also sources that are from, as it were, the other side. So you say that you were referring to, such things as meetings of the ANC's National Working Committee, the NEC, and notes about the Mel's Park talks led by Professor Veli Esterhuizen and Thabo Mbeki, communications between Oliver Tambo and Operation Vula, the Kobe Coetzee papers, and the Broederbond even. How do you avoid the sense of history being written by the victors and aptly capture the trade-offs that happened on both sides and capture them accurately and fairly?
Let's be clear. In post this book that comes to 1990, the head of the intelligence service of the apartheid system said in 1993 that they destroyed more than 44 tons of their documents. Those are gone. What we have done is to try and get whatever is possible from all sides. And wherever we have found it, We give you the reference, and when we use material, we put it in quotes so that anybody who wants to interrogate what we have done can go to the sources and check not just whether the quote is accurate, but the context in which the quote is. For us, that is important so that people see the forces that were at play and do not see it as a single story or a triumphalist or a victor's story. What we want to see is the change of thinking that went on all sides of the protagonist to this conflict. Our level of objectivity, I know that the other night at the launch, we were criticized to say we have not given part of the spilling of the tea leaves. And we've said that's not our job. Our job is to look at the forces that were at play, give the sources, and we say to people, if we've missed any of the dots, put it on the table, and the dots must be verifiable, and let's then analyze what happened so that we draw the correct lessons, but we do not make it as a story imposed by Pallo and Mac Mahaj. That's our objective.
Sure. So having collated all of this, Pallo Jordan, let me come back to you, sir. Having collated all of these various sources and put them together in Breakthrough, what is the prevailing sense of how would you characterize the negotiations before the negotiations? What brought all of us, the various parties, to the negotiating table at the end of the 20th of the 90th? All right, let's just say in 1989, 1990. So just what would you say, how would you characterize that? Because there are various narratives. Some would say that you were outwitted and outmaneuvered by, the National Party and the apartheid state, but others yet will say, actually, you outmaneuvered the apartheid state and also the accumulation of all the forces outside and the pressure that was brought to bear is what eventually led to the negotiations leading to the elections in 1994. So from what you have done, what is the prevailing sense of what were the dominant forces?
Yes. I think what we tried to convey in our narrative is that during the 1980s, all those forces, political, social, and otherwise, who were seriously and in earnest interested in the destruction of apartheid and the creation of democracy, converged around the African National Congress. And that came about not as a result of some miracle or someone swinging, a magic wand. The ANC had elaborated a strategy over some 30 years, which constituted of 4 elements. The one was the creation of an effective underground movement inside the country, which would assume responsibility for galvanizing and mobilizing the masses of people into political action. That in turn would produce circumstances and conditions inside the country conducive to the conduct of armed struggle. That armed struggle, that general struggle, would also receive reinforcement and support by the mobilization of international solidarity. What we were able to do with respect to our underground, which had been virtually destroyed after the Rivonia trial and Rivonia Mark II, in which Mac Mahaj was involved, was to rebuild that very slowly and painstakingly over a number of years. I would say the thaw begins in the 1970s, heralded by the strikes of workers in the Durban Pinetown area, the emergence of Black consciousness amongst young Black intellectuals and students, and that then creates conditions for mass mobilization. With respect to the armed struggle as well, the ANC had attempted to reach South Africa through unfriendly borders because you still had Smith ruled Rhodesia and Portuguese ruled Mozambique on our borders, and that had not succeeded. So we had to reimagine the armed struggle and its conduct as well. And I think once the conducive conditions were there inside the country as a result of mass mobilization, that was very effective. One of the issues that we highlight was the capacity that MK had acquired by the 80s of striking anywhere inside the country. Internationally, the South African racist regime had consistently received the support since 1948 of countries like Britain, United States, France, other leading powers in the West. We were able to mobilize the people of those countries to compel their governments to change their policies. And that took time. And it had a number of high points and significant moments. One of those high points, for example, was the birthday concert for Nelson Mandela in 1987, held at Wembley Stadium, one of the biggest pop concerts, which was internationally broadcast.
Right.
And in one afternoon, we raised the stature and profile of Nelson Mandela from being just a South African political prisoner to an international figure. But that was done in the teeth of opposition from the British government.
Mr. Jordan, let me come in there. Unfortunately, yeah. Sir, let me come in there and just ask that we take a quick pause and take a quick break so that we can continue in just a moment. This is the Intel here on eNCA.